The air was sharp with November's chill, each breath Ethan exhaled turning into a fragile cloud that vanished too quickly, just like everything in his life had. He sat hunched on a park bench, shoulders drawn in as if trying to protect himself from more than just the cold. His fingers, stiff and trembling, gripped the fraying straps of a faded duffel bag, the only remnants of the life he once knew. Not long ago, he had been a man with a purpose. His small shop had been his pride, a place where laughter, hard work, and the smell of fresh coffee filled his days. But one bad turn had led to another, debts piling high, the bank's letters turning from polite reminders to cold demands. The day the shop closed was the same day his marriage ended. Home became a memory, replaced by nights in shelters and long hours wandering streets that no longer felt familiar. The city glowed in the distance, its light smearing into a haze as tears welled in his eyes. Somewhere nearby, a couple's laughter floated through the air, bright and careless, slicing into him like a quiet reminder of what he'd lost. Once, that had been him, hand in hand with someone he loved, dreaming of forever. Now, forever felt like a cruel joke. He lowered his head, willing himself to disappear into the shadows of the park, because it was easier to be unseen than to face the weight of a world that had moved on without him. Rain began to fall in thin, cold needles, soaking through Ethan's worn jacket within minutes. He pulled the collar up, but the fabric was too thin to keep the damp from settling into his bones. Around him, people hurried past under bright umbrellas, their shoes clicking against the wet pavement, each one with somewhere to be. He had nowhere. He was staring down at the slick ground when a soft voice broke through the patter of rain. "Here," the woman said, holding out an umbrella. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes that didn't seem to look through him like most people did, but at him. Before he could speak, she placed a warm paper cup in his hand. Steam curled up from the coffee, carrying the faint scent of hope. Ethan blinked, startled. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You look like you need a friend tonight," she said simply, as if it required no further explanation. She didn't press him for details, didn't pry into the wreckage of his life. She just stood beside him in the rain, sharing the shelter of the umbrella as though they'd known each other for years. Something inside him, something buried under months of loss and silence, shifted. He wasn't sure if it was gratitude or disbelief, but he felt the faintest warmth spread through the cold. For the first time in a long while, someone had stopped, noticed, and cared. And that, in its quiet way, felt almost like the beginning of something. The diner smelled of fresh coffee and frying bacon, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. Ethan sat across from the woman, Margaret. She'd introduced herself, his hands wrapped tightly around the cup she'd given him, more for the heat than the taste. The hum of soft music and the clink of dishes felt strangely comforting, like a world he'd been locked out of for too long. Margaret didn't rush him. She simply sipped her coffee, her steady gaze telling him she was ready to listen whenever he was ready to speak. Slowly, words began to tumble out, halting at first, then spilling faster. He told her about the shop he'd built from scratch, the joy of serving customers, the crushing debt that crept in like an uninvited shadow. He spoke of the day the bank took the store, the night his wife left, the slow, humiliating slide into homelessness. When he finished, he braced himself for pity or awkward silence. Instead, Margaret leaned forward, her tone gentle but certain. "I can't give you back what you lost," she said, "but I can give you a chance." She told him about the community center she ran, a place that helped people find their footing again. There was an opening for a volunteer, someone to help with repairs and serve meals. It wasn't a job in the usual sense, but it was a start. Ethan hesitated. Pride told him to refuse, but something deeper, the faint spark of wanting to matter again, whispered that maybe this was exactly what he needed. The days at the community center blurred into a rhythm Ethan hadn't felt in years. Morning light spilled through the cracked windows as he swept floors, fixed wobbly chairs, and ladled steaming soup into waiting bowls. At first, he worked in silence, keeping his head down, unsure if he belonged among the staff and the steady stream of people who came in from the cold. But slowly, the walls he had built around himself began to crack. A single smile from a mother picking up groceries for her kids. A grateful handshake from an old man who'd been sleeping in his car. Each small connection chipped away at the weight he carried. One evening, just as he was locking up, a young man he barely recognized appeared at the door. His clothes were cleaner, his eyes brighter than the last time Ethan had seen him. "I just wanted to say thank you," the man said. "That night you sat with me, you didn't treat me like trash. You made me believe I'm worth something." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a quiet conversation over soup. But hearing those words, he realized he was giving people the very thing he had once been desperate for, dignity. Walking home that night, the air felt different. Lighter. For the first time since losing everything, he wasn't counting what had been taken from him. He was beginning to see what he had to give. The park looked different now. The bare winter trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the bench where Ethan had once sat, broken and invisible, stood empty in the afternoon sun. He paused there, groceries tucked under one arm, a bag of essentials for a neighbor who had fallen on hard times. He remembered that cold November night as if it were yesterday, the weight of the duffel bag, the sting of the rain, the echo of laughter that had made his loss feel unbearable. Back then, he couldn't imagine a future where he'd be standing here again, not as a man abandoned by life, but as someone with purpose. As he continued down the path, he caught his reflection in a shop window. There was still tiredness in his eyes, and the scars of the past hadn't faded. But there was something new too, strength. The kind that comes not from what you've gained, but from what you've endured. He reached the small apartment building where his neighbor lived, knocked gently, and handed over the groceries with a smile. The look of relief and gratitude on their face warmed him in a way he couldn't quite put into words. Walking away, he tilted his head toward the sky and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't to anyone in particular, maybe to the woman who'd stopped for him, maybe to the strangers he'd met along the way, maybe to life itself. Starting over hadn't given him back what he lost. It had given him something far greater.